Lila and Marcus never believed in the stories whispered about October. Moving into the old apartment on Ashwood Street, they thought the shadows and strange noises were just their imagination. But on the very first night, the darkness began to watch, and the whispers started calling their names. Every corner they turned, every mirror they faced, something was there, something waiting. By sunrise, they realized the truth no one warned them about. In October, the shadows don't just hide, they follow, and they never let go. I remember the first night of October like it happened yesterday, though the memory still feels like a dream, or a nightmare I'm trapped inside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and something darker beneath it, something I couldn't name. I had just moved into my small apartment, excited to finally have a place of my own, but from the moment I turned the key in the lock, I felt a weight pressing down on me, as if the walls themselves were aware of my presence. At first, I told myself it was just nerves, the result of living alone for the first time. But the moment I stepped inside, I noticed a strange chill that lingered in corners where the sunlight couldn't reach, and shadows that seemed too deep, too eager to consume the light. That night I tried to sleep, but the apartment felt alive in ways I couldn't understand. A soft scratching sound came from the hallway, faint at first, like claws dragging across the wood floor. My heartbeat sped up, and I lay frozen, listening. Then, a whisper, barely audible, slithered through the room. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably sinister, carrying an intent I couldn't ignore. I forced myself to get up, telling myself it was just the building settling, or maybe a raccoon outside. But the air was still, and every window was locked tight. As the night stretched on, I noticed something even more unsettling. Shadows moved independently of the objects that should have cast them. A chair in the corner would remain still, but its shadow twisted across the walls as if it had a life of its own. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but the movement never stopped. By the time I reached my bed, I could feel a presence at the edge of my vision, something that retreated when I looked directly at it. My chest tightened. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that I was imagining things. Yet every instinct screamed that I was not alone. Then came the footprints. Damp, small, and oddly human, they appeared on the wooden floor, starting from the living room and leading directly to my bed. I had no explanation. No one had entered the apartment. But the prints were real, pressed into the floorboards, leaving a trail that ended just inches from where I lay. My stomach churned, and I felt a cold sweat trickle down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, paralyzed by fear. The final detail that shattered whatever composure I had left was the smell, a faint stench of rot clinging to the prints, a smell so foul it burned my nostrils. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright, staring at the darkness, listening to the creaks, the whispers, the distant, impossible thumps from beneath the floor. By morning, the footprints had vanished, leaving only the lingering stench and a sense of dread that settled into my bones. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was a trick of the mind, that moving into a new place always came with unease. But deep down, I knew something had been in that apartment with me, something patient, waiting for the right moment to show itself fully. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see the shadowy shapes twisting on the walls, hear the whispering voice, and smell that rotting presence creeping along the floor. And I know, with a certainty I can't escape, that it didn't leave. I tried to convince myself that the first night had been a fluke, a combination of nerves, imagination, and exhaustion. But the apartment refused to let me believe that. The second night arrived, and with it, a new layer of terror. The scratching sounds returned, sharper this time, circling the room like an unseen predator testing its boundaries. The whispers grew clearer, though I still couldn't make out the words. It felt as if they were speaking directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely, pulling at the corners of my thoughts. I hugged myself, trembling, wishing I could wake from the nightmare that had become my reality. I began to notice patterns in the disturbances. The shadows weren't random. They lingered near corners, stretched toward me when I sat in certain spots, and recoiled when I turned the light on. Mirrors became unbearable. Their reflections were never quite right. One morning, I saw my reflection smirk at me when I hadn't moved my lips. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, certain I had glimpsed something that shouldn't exist. I tried rational explanations, drafts, building noises, fatigue. Yet logic failed me. I started sleeping with the television blaring, even during the day, desperate for sound to mask the quiet movements that had begun to haunt me constantly. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door, soft and deliberate, never aligning with any visitor or neighbor. I checked the locks repeatedly, pressing my ears to the wood, only to hear nothing, or worse, a faint echo of my own heartbeat joining another, slower, heavier, that did not belong to me. Curiosity forced me to research the building's past. The stories I found were unsettling. Decades ago, someone had vanished from the apartment. No body was ever recovered, only rumors of strange noises and shadows stalking late-night residents. The words "October Shadow" appeared repeatedly, attached to vague accounts of entities that haunted those who lived alone, preying on fear until it consumed them entirely. I laughed at first, telling myself ghost stories were childish. But that laughter died in my throat when I realized the noises in my apartment were growing more deliberate, almost intelligent, like something was learning my fears and feeding on them. One night, I woke to a sensation that made my blood run cold. The bed shifted beneath me, a weight pressing down where no one should be. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs as I felt fingers brush my ankle. I wanted to move, to scream, but my body refused. I could only lie there frozen as the temperature around me plummeted. Then came the tap at the window, soft, rhythmic, insistent. I stared at the glass, unable to believe what I saw. A face, pale and gaunt, pressed against the outside, eyes hollow, lips stretched into a cruel grin. My vision blurred as I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone, leaving only wet footprints leading away. I couldn't sleep after that. The air smelled faintly of decay for hours, clinging to the walls and my clothes. I touched the window hesitantly, and the glass was warm, as if the figure had just pressed its hand against it. That night, I realized with absolute certainty that whatever haunted the apartment wasn't limited to shadows or whispers. It was watching, learning, waiting, and it knew exactly who I was. I decided to record the noises that haunted the apartment at night, hoping that evidence would prove I wasn't losing my mind. I set up my phone on the nightstand, its microphone pointed toward the hallway and the corners where the shadows lingered. The first hour passed in silence, but shortly after midnight, the whispering began again, louder this time, more deliberate. It wasn't random. It recited my thoughts, my deepest fears, things I had never spoken aloud. The realization made my stomach churn. This presence could hear me, could know me. I wanted to leave, to run as far as possible. But when I tried the front door, it wouldn't budge. The key turned in the lock, the knob rattled, but the door stayed stubbornly closed. Panic bubbled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself that I could wait it out. I could feel it moving around the apartment, brushing past furniture, stretching across the floors and walls, leaving the temperature colder in its wake. Every corner seemed alive, the shadows thickening, pooling like ink ready to swallow me. I ran to the living room hoping to confront whatever it was, only to find the furniture rearranged in ways that made no sense. Chairs were turned upside down, tables shoved against walls that hadn't been touched before. The patterns they formed were deliberate, like a message I couldn't yet decipher. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized the whispers were more than sounds. They were instructions, a dark guide leading me toward something I couldn't see. I followed the pull, my footsteps careful and hesitant, to the kitchen. The lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. And then I saw it. A hand, black as tar, emerging from the corner, elongated and impossibly thin. It moved with purpose, reaching toward me, leaving streaks of shadow behind it that clung to the tiles. My limbs froze, and I stumbled back into the refrigerator, my chest heaving, every nerve screaming to escape. It didn't advance in a normal way. It crawled along the surfaces, sliding over counters, and shelves like it was liquid, silent except for the faint scraping of its nails. Then came a sound that I couldn't ignore. My full name, spoken clearly, with a cadence that chilled me to the bone. It was a whisper, but somehow louder than the air around me, pressing into my mind until I couldn't think. I tried to breathe, tried to ground myself in reality, but every shadow, every flicker of movement, carried intent. My apartment, once familiar, had transformed into something alien, hostile, alive. The walls seemed to pulse, and the floorboards groaned under an invisible weight. I realized in a panic that I had never been alone. It had always been here, lurking, waiting for me to notice. I backed toward the bedroom, seeking light, warmth, safety, but the shadows had already claimed it. The corners were suffused with blackness, the ceiling crawling with forms I could barely comprehend. And then, a voice, whispering directly into my ear, saying a single, horrifying word. Finally. I couldn't stay another night. The apartment had become a prison, its walls alive with shadows that seemed to move even when I wasn't looking. I packed a bag quietly, avoiding the dark corners where the presence lingered, felt its attention pressing down on me with every step. The city streets outside were empty, fog curling low over the pavement, muting every sound. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see it following, but the mist swallowed the world, leaving me with nothing but my own fear. I checked into a cheap motel, choosing a room on the ground floor, thinking that visibility and proximity to others might offer some protection. I left the television on, lamps lit, hoping light could ward off the darkness I carried with me, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the presence near me, a warm breath brushing my neck, fingers grazing the blankets in ways I couldn't see. I realized it wasn't bound to the apartment. Whatever this thing was, it had followed me. In the morning, I thought the nightmare had paused, perhaps waiting for the next night to resume. But the hallway outside my room told a different story. Wet footprints led from the exit of the motel elevator straight to my door. They stopped at the threshold, like the entity had inspected the space, confirming my presence. The smell was the same, decay, faint but unmistakable, clinging to the walls and carpet. My stomach turned, and I felt my pulse spike. I dared not open the door. I feared that stepping outside might allow it to fully enter, to become tangible. When I peeked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. No one was there. Yet the footprints remained, and I could swear they had shifted slightly since I first saw them. I spent the day moving cautiously around the room, checking every shadow, every reflection. The mirrors became unbearable. The slightest movement of the curtains created shapes that didn't belong, stretching like black fingers across the floor. By nightfall, the whispers began again. They were louder now, more insistent, carrying threats and secrets I had never spoken. I realized it was learning, adapting to my fear, growing stronger with every glance I cast toward the corners. The bed trembled, and I could feel it pressing against me even without touching, as if it had taken on weight, a corporeal form I could not resist. I tried to leave, but the key wouldn't turn. I was trapped again, just like in the apartment, but now I understood that no matter how far I ran, there was nowhere to hide. Then I saw it in the mirror, not a reflection of myself, but a shadowed figure crouched behind the glass, pale eyes staring directly at me. It didn't blink, didn't move, yet it exuded intent, a patience so profound it made my chest ache. I backed away, but its gaze followed, and then the words appeared, written faintly in condensation across the glass. "You can never leave October." Even after I left the motel, the feeling persisted. Every mirror, every reflective surface carried a piece of it. The whispers followed me, faint but constant, reminding me that distance was meaningless. I realized with terror that this wasn't just a haunting tied to a place, it was tied to me, and October was never going to end. I thought moving again would save me. I left without telling anyone, without warning, without looking back. I traveled as far as I could afford, switching cities like someone on the run from the police, except what chased me didn't obey distance, borders, or walls. I rented another place and tried to start over, but even on the first night I felt it. A heaviness in the air, a pressure behind my eyes as if October itself had unpacked with me. I barely slept. I sat on the floor with every light on, listening to the silence that trembled like something trying to swallow the room whole. In the mornings, I tried to pretend life was normal. I drank coffee, walked through crowds, sat in public parks where sunlight touched every surface. Yet even there, I felt watched. People passed me slowly, their eyes lingering a little too long, their faces too still, like puppets awaiting a signal. In the reflection of store windows, I sometimes saw an extra shape beside me, tall, thin, and without features, vanishing whenever I turned my head. The recordings from the apartment remained on my phone. I played one out of morbid curiosity. The whispering wasn't faint anymore. It was clear, articulate, familiar. The voice sounded like mine. It recited my thoughts as I listened, even the ones I was thinking in that exact moment. That was when I understood the truth. It wasn't just inside my home or my mirror or my room. It was inside my mind. I could leave places, but there was no leaving myself. The shadows began appearing sooner this time. They no longer waited for night. They pooled under tables, clung to ceilings, stretched across floors like stains that spread when I blinked. The temperature dropped at random, and with it came that smell. Damp, rotting, final. I considered ending it, thinking that maybe death would break whatever had attached itself to me. But another thought followed, darker and colder. What if death was what it wanted? What if dying only let it finish whatever had begun when October 1st opened its mouth around me? Days blurred. My phone battery drained without being used. Lights flickered even when unplugged. And one night, when I woke from a shallow sleep, every wall of the room was covered in photographs again. My life. Every place I had been since leaving the apartment. In every picture, there was a figure behind me, taller than any human, closer each time. I don't remember dropping the phone, but I remember the sound it made when it hit the floor. I remember turning slowly, knowing something stood behind me before I faced it. I didn't see its face, only the outline towering in the corner, darker than shadow, wider than the room should allow. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The air itself bent around it, like reality recognized its owner. And then I heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but a low, patient promise breathed directly into my skull. October never ends.